Everybody. I'll wait for just a couple of seconds so that everybody can get settled. Okay. I'll wait for just a couple of seconds so that there we go. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to P&P Live. My name is Beth Wong, and I am an event coordinator at Politics and Prose. We thank you so much for joining us here tonight to celebrate the launch of Disability Visibility First-Person Stories from the 21st Century. At any time during the event tonight, you can click on the link that I've just posted in the chat to purchase the book from P&P's website. Remember that these book sales enable us to bring you the programming that Politics and Prose is so proud of, including this event tonight, and we need those book sales to continue to go on. You can ask the authors a question tonight by clicking on the Q&A button, which is found at the bottom of your screen. Be sure to submit your questions there and not in the chat so that the contributors will see them. On to the main event. Tonight, we are so pleased to host Alice Wong, editor of Disability Visibility, as well as contributors to the book, Rebecca Coakley and Jen Deerenwater. Alice Wong is a disabled activist, media maker, and research consultant based in San Francisco, California. She is the founder and director of the Disability Visibility Project, an online community dedicated to creating, sharing, and amplifying disability media and culture. Rebecca Coakley is the director of the Disability Justice Initiative at the Center for American Progress, where her work focuses on disability policy. Most recently, she served as the executive director of the National Council on Disability, an independent agency charged with advising Congress and the White House on issues of national disability public policy. And finally, Jen Deerenwater is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, bisexual, two-spirit, multiply disabled journalist, speaker, and organizer who covers the myriad issues her communities face. Welcome, Alice, Rebecca, and Jen.
Oh, thank you. So it is incredibly exciting to be here with you all today. This is my very first book event for Disability Visibility. And I want to thank Beth Wong and everyone at Politics and Prose for inviting me, and Becca and Jen. As Beth mentioned earlier, I am a disabled activist, writer, podcaster, and research consultant based in San Francisco. I'm also a wheelchair and ventilator user, and I don't fly or travel because of my disability. In preparation for my book launch, I had a lot of anxiety on how I was going to promote this book, since conventional wisdom is that you have to have events all over at libraries, bookstores, and conferences, yada, yada, yada. And this is my first time with a major publisher, and I wasn't sure about the reception and interest in my book once it's released. Since the pandemic happened, the world changed. Suddenly, non-disabled folks started freaking out about being cooped up at home and having to learn how to socialize and work remotely. For some disabled or chronically ill people, this wasn't much of a shock. I know so many people who have full and active lives from their bed or couch. Most of my activism and friendships have been entirely online, and it's not second best compared to in-person experiences by any means. Even though the world is one big dumpster fire, it's been bittersweet to see things become a little more accessible now after years of advocacy by disabled people. Conferences are now online, when I was told in the past They shouldn't let me participate remotely because of connectivity issues, or that they believe that engagement is better when it's in person. Theater, concerts, book events like this are live streamed now after disabled people fought for access, only to be dismissed and told it was too difficult. While it is a strange time to come out with a book, I believe it's also given me a little more even playing field with all my book talks now taking place from my home to where I can reach people from all over the world. I sincerely hope that institutions, organizations, and bookstores like Politics and Prose continue to have online events well after the pandemic, in addition to the regular programming. Online events can provide access to new audiences and to writers who don't have the privilege to travel. There are many reasons why I created Disability Visibility, First-Person Stories for the 21st Century. This anthology is rooted in my love for stories by disabled people. Disability culture is everywhere, but it's not represented enough. It's also not valued or seen as an actual culture. In editing this anthology, featuring first-person stories by 37 amazing and brilliant disabled people, I invite all of you to challenge what you know about disability and appreciate the richness and variation in our community. For example, to all the lovely non-disabled folks who are on this, participating right now in this event, I'm going to ask you, what was the last book you read by a disabled person? And if you can't think of one, why is that? Just something to ponder, something to think about. The origin of this book started in August 2018, when I received an email out of the blue from Catherine Tung, an editor at Vintage Books at the time, who is now at Beacon Press. She asked me if I had any interest in editing an anthology, and I was like, why, yes, I am. I also want to give a shout out to Anna Kaufman, the editor I currently work with at Vintage Books, and Julia Carden, my agent. The title of the book is based on the Disability Visibility Project, an initiative I founded in 2014 that started as an oral history campaign and grew into an online community dedicated to creating, sharing, and amplifying disability media and culture. I wanted to create a platform featuring disabled people telling their own stories in their own words through guest essays, my podcast, Twitter chats, and other collaborations. The predominant narratives and representations of disability are still rather one-dimensional and often centered on what non-disabled people expect, since they are presumed to be the default audience. For example, movies and TV shows continue to have disabled characters played by non-disabled people. We have books with disabled characters written by non-disabled authors without any sensitivity readers or consultation by people with actual lived experiences. These are certainly better than 10, 20, 30 years ago, but we have a long way to go. In editing disability visibility, I was intentional in the people that I wanted to highlight. Each of these stories are powerful, political, and personal, with immense complexity. And this is just a small sample of stories that moved me for the past 19 years. I think of this book as a dialogue with the past, present, and future. In thinking about access, as I mentioned earlier about online events, I wanted to offer as many different ways for this book to reach people, to leverage the book as a stepping stone for opportunities to learn more. And I did this in 3 ways. I included in the back of the book a list of additional readings and resources for people to discover, because there is so much out there, and it's another way to amplify more disabled writers and activists. A book can be inaccessible in its language and costs. So I commissioned a plain language summary of disability visibility by Sarah Luchman, a disabled journalist. This is currently free and available on my website for anyone to use. Naomi Ortiz is a disabled writer who wrote a discussion guide for my book. And this can be used by any teacher, book club, or individual reader. The purpose of the discussion guide is to give people an opportunity to reflect on what they read and participate in various exercises, which can spark dialogue and hopefully growth. You can find both of these publications at Disability Visibility Project/book. Before we start the conversation with Jen Dearwater and Rebecca Coakley, two contributors in Disability Visibility, I thought I'd read a short excerpt from my introduction. This may feel true for every era, but I believe I am living in a time where disabled people are more visible than before. And yet, while representation is exciting and important, it is not enough. I want and expect more. We should all expect more. We all deserve more. There must be depth, range, nuance to disability representation in media. This is the current challenge and opportunity for the publishing industry and popular culture at large. Disabled people have always existed, whether the word disability is used or not. To me, disability is not a monolith, nor is it a clear-cut binary of disabled and non-disabled. Disability is mutable and ever-evolving. Disability is both apparent and non-apparent. Disability is pain, struggle, brilliance, abundance, and joy. Disability is sociopolitical, cultural, and biological. Being visible and claiming a disability identity brings risks as much as it brings pride. As a marginalized person, I don't feel it's enough to just keep saying, hey, pay attention to us. We're here, we exist. We're just as human as you. I want things to improve, even while grappling with this impulse, with the tension between subject, and audience. I want to center the wisdom of disabled people and welcome others in rather than ask for permission or acknowledgement. Harriet McBryde Johnson wrote that storytelling is an activity, a shared experience, not an object. Collectively, through our stories, our connections, and our actions, disabled people will continue to confront and transform the status quo. It's who we are. So that's the end of the excerpt of my introduction. And I'd really love to bring in Jen and Becca to this conversation. And I'm going to start with to ask both of you to just spend some time talking about your essay that is in the anthology. Jen, would you like to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. So my piece in the book is called The Erasure of Indigenous People in Chronic Illness. And so it's a piece that was birthed from my own experiences of ableism and colonialism in healthcare and just the medical industrial complex. So in this piece, I speak to the reality of how racism and the continued illegal occupation of our Indigenous lands are impacting our health, and how it's creating disabilities and chronic illnesses within Indigenous community, but also how we're being erased within, the medical industrial complex. So because genocide's never ended for us, we're still not receiving the care that we need. We're being left to die, and we can clearly see that under the COVID-19 pandemic. And, even when we receive care and services, our indigeneity is still often erased, or it's mocked and ridiculed by the system. And so I clearly talk about that and demonstrate some of the abuse that I have suffered as a disabled and chronically ill Native within these medical institutions, including the George Washington University Hospital, which is a highly reputable hospital in DC. But I've had horrible experiences of racism and outright denial of care. And so I really talk about that in my piece, and how, disability justice for Native people is so intrinsically tied to tribal sovereignty. It is tied to racial justice. It's tied to reproductive justice. All of these come together. And I really try to highlight that in this piece. It's hard to pack in all this information and also try to teach, sort of a Native 101 to a primarily non-Native audience that knows very little about us. It's hard to do that in a short essay, but I hope that I accomplished that with this piece.
Thank you, Jen. How about you, Becca?
So my piece is called The Anti-Abortion Bill That You're Not Hearing About, and it's part of a long-standing intellectual, in my own head, feud that I have with Governor Greg Abbott from Texas, who is an openly disabled governor. And it really centers on the conversation around reproductive justice and the right to decide what gets done to your body. And with it, as a little person, this issue is really complicated. In couples where both parents have the same kind of dwarfism, roughly a quarter of pregnancies end in a terminal diagnosis. And so our community has always had this sort of cognitive dissonance around abortion, where at the same time that a lot of families make the choice to abort because of a terminal diagnosis and believe in the right to choose and the right to decide what happens to your body, at the same time, you have to balance that with the reality that non-disabled people will choose to abort someone like you. And it's a really complicated thing, and it's a hard thing. And for me personally, I was supposed to be one of four, and I had two siblings before me and one after me, all of which had double dominant diagnoses with their dwarfism. And it was before, two were before Roe and one was after. And so the choices that my mom had to make weren't real choices. They were choices that, largely were made by society at that point in time. And so I think it really, for me, watching Texas debate this bill, and actually right now there's active debate on bills like this in Colorado, I believe in Tennessee and in Ohio. To me, it's just a way that the parties tend to use people with disabilities as a football. Like, I feel like we're the football and somebody is Lucy and someone is Charlie Brown. And it's like, oh, look, disability, come and get it. Like, who's taking care of these poor disabled people? And it's like, you're not taking care of us. Like, you're cutting our health care. You're cutting our education. You're denying us access to what we need to survive and thrive, but yet you want to hold us up here as a prop in your debate on women's right to, or people's rights to decide what happens to their bodies. And so, I think the thing that I think about this book a lot is this book is like the conversation that you have with your adult friends at an adult sleepover, like the 2 a.m. conversation. Y'all have had too much wine. You start sort of rambling and you're like, oh my God, have you ever thought about this issue? And it's the things that you normally wouldn't say in the daylight or in polite company, but it's the things that you say with your people. And I really feel like in a lot of ways, this book is like a conversation among our people.
Thank you for that. I think both of your pieces right now, I mean, I didn't predict this, but there's a lot of pieces that are incredibly timely right now, even though a lot of the pieces were written 4, 5, 10 years ago. We are living in not just the United States right now, but just globally, an incredibly strange, surreal, bizarre time. And at least within the United States, we have an administration that is actively trying to kill so many communities. And I'm talking about Black, Brown, Indigenous people. We're talking about disabled people. We're talking about older people. We're talking about queer people. Let's dig in a little bit about, this time we're living in right now. And, really thinking about just not only the pandemic, but also the uprisings we're seeing toward systemic racism and, really see such a response by people of color, including disabled people of color, really just, saying, hey, the systems are broken. This is not at all, it's never been acceptable, but, it's time for reckoning. So for Jen and Becca, I'd like to ask, what are the major issues that's really heavy on your mind right now? Jen, you are a journalist, and I'd love to hear about some of your reporting and just some of the work that you're doing right now.
Oh, well, so I've kind of been, in terms of my reporting work, so I run an organization called Crushing Colonialism, and then I also work as a journalist. So I feel like I'm switching between my organizer and my journalist hat a lot. But in terms of some of the coverage I've been doing, I've been looking a lot at how the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting Native people. And I've also done some coverage on the protests that have been happening in Washington, D.C. since end of like late May, I believe it was. So I've been thinking about this. One of our questions we talked about is like what we feel like is the most pressing disability issue right now. And it's really hard for me to answer that because I feel like our community is so vast. There are all kinds of disabled people from every religion, ethnic, racial background, gender, sexual orientation, so like all of these various issues that we're struggling against are important and crucial. They're crucial. I feel like saying important undermines how crucial they actually are. But so I'm just going to talk about this, like coming from the space of being, a queer, disabled, chronically ill Native person. 22% of Native people in the United States have a disability. We have the highest rates per capita of disabilities, chronic illnesses, police brutality, pollution of our lands, incarceration, rape, trafficking, murder, and so many other issues. And, I don't say this to undermine the pain and oppression of any other marginalized group. I believe wholeheartedly that we all need to be standing as accomplices to one another, but you cannot change the problems within so-called America if you're not looking at where the problems first began, and that means looking at how Indigenous people are treated. And so all these issues I've mentioned, they're absolutely intertwined with like the fight for disability justice, just as disability justice is so intrinsically tied to the fight for tribal sovereignty and racial justice and other forms of justice, like reproductive justice, which Rebecca kind of spoke on in her piece and just now. You simply can't have one fight without the other. And I feel like if our communities and movements leave even one person behind, then we really haven't done our job to create a just world. And I feel like right now, the most glaring example of some of these problems we're facing as Native people is the COVID-19 pandemic. We make up less than 2% of the total population in this country. Yet we've had the highest per capita contraction rates in the US. The Navajo Nation, the Hopi, the White Mountain Apache, like they're struggling a lot right now. And a lot of that is not just because of a pandemic, but because the United States government has not honored a single one of its trust and treaty responsibilities to us. And that includes our treaty guaranteed right to health care. I think a lot of non-natives don't understand that being Native is not necessarily being a race of people, but it means you are a citizen or a member of a sovereign nation. And so that's a very different thing. We have our own governments, our own languages, our own ways of doing things, ceremony, creation stories. And our right to healthcare is something that we negotiated it into the treaties with the United States, and we literally paid for that healthcare with loss of life and land. And the United States has never fully honored that. Tribal leaders say that we need at least 10 billion, that's billion with a B as in boy. We need $10 billion just to get the Indian Health Services to meet the bare minimum like threshold of where the rest of healthcare entities are within this country. And so when you have something like a pandemic that comes hitting you like COVID-19 has done, and you don't, your people are living in high rates of poverty, they don't have clean running water, they're living in multi-generational homes because of issues of access to housing, and you don't have good health care. Your people are still going missing and murdered. There's a lot of issues here that impact us. And even when the government comes in to supposedly, save us poor little downtrodden Indians, it's sort of it's a white savior thing that's kind of similar to what Rebecca was talking about in terms of the government trying to, save all us disabled people. But even when they come in to do this, they don't do it right. Tribal nations were guaranteed $8 billion through the CARES Act. And those funds were supposed to be distributed within 30 days of the CARES Act being signed into law, which was on March 27th. Well, it's now July 11th, and we still don't have all of that $8 billion. Yet corporations have been bailed out, So it just really, for me as like a disabled Native, I'm never going to have disability justice. I'm never going to have the life and the things I deserve if we are not respecting tribal sovereignty on these lands.
Oh, thank you so much, Jen. This is exactly what the world needs right now, to center the conversation on Black, Brown, and Indigenous disabled people. I feel like, you all are, it's absolutely necessary to center these voices and this work, because otherwise the solutions that we created, if it's not driven by the most multiply marginalized student being poop. So I want to switch the background because you mentioned Governor Greg Abbott. And, right now we have local and national leaders who are completely considering huge numbers of people as expendable during the coronavirus. They are they are massively, pushing for reopening or whatever we want to call it. They're not really enforcing or, advocating for wearing masks. There's a lot of, distrust of science and public health. So what's your take on kind of just the political landscape and basically the negligence and how it's going to result in the suffering and basically genocide of a lot of people?
The first thing I would say is, what my friend and colleague Jen said, like ditto times 50 billion 200 917 or whatever number. I really do think that there is such a fundamental need for tangible, and I hate allyship because I just feel it's so performative, like it's such a performative term, like accompliship, I guess, or like rolling up our sleeves and like getting in the dirt and like working alongside each other and across a lot of these communities. And there's a fundamental responsibility across all of our spaces. I've had the fortune over the last couple of years to spend a fair amount of time with a number of folks from First Nations communities. And we had this conversation. I always go back to it where we were at this big groovy meeting to talk about money and politics and equality. And our colleagues from tribal countries said, okay, while y'all talk about that, those of us who are ready to have the tough conversation about what it means if Trump refuses to leave the White House, we're going to go outside and have that conversation. So if everybody wants to sit in here and be groovy and like do whatever it is you want to do and talk about collaboration and blending and braiding resources, y'all do that, but we're going to go have the real conversation. And it ended up being all the disabled folks at the meeting and all the folks from First Nations communities. And it was like the most real moment for all of us because we were like, of course it's all of us, because we really do have an understanding that no matter what they do, no matter what policy is put out, our people are going to die. Like we don't have the luxury to expect survival. We don't have the luxury to think, oh, eventually they will get to us. Like that's a freaking fairy tale. We've never had that luxury. And I think when it comes to COVID in particular, we were prepared for the deaths the minute, like I started thinking about deaths and funerals the minute I started seeing the numbers overseas. And being like, this is the reality for our folks. Okay, people, we got to hold, like, this is not going to be easy. Nobody's coming to rescue us. This isn't some biblical proverb of sitting on your roof waiting for a guy in a boat to come by. No, that boat's gone. Mm-hmm. And the reality is the boat wasn't there to begin with. I think, one of the conversations that I keep hearing people have, especially in coming to me as a former member of the Obama administration, is, well, we're going to take it back to the, when we get the administration back, we're going to take it back like to 8 years ago. Let's focus on restoring. And it reminds me even about the conversation around the ADA Restoration Act versus ADA amendments, which was like this huge hubbub back in the day. But let's be real. Things weren't great for marginalized folks 4 to 8 years ago. Things have never been equitable for our people. And so I think there's a growing conversation, particularly among marginalized communities. And I'm actually seeing it cross marginalized communities now, which is really exciting. And I think books like this actually help further the conversation. But about what is it we actually want? And instead of saying, let's take it back to like 4 or 8 or 16 or however many years we want to go back, let's instead say, like, what would it actually like, what does it need to look like? How can we go back and correct some like these long-standing historic inequities? How can we make sure that folks on tribal lands have clean water? How can we make sure that like tribes have the sovereignty and tribal governments have the sovereignty that they are actually like required by law to have? You know, people are talking about what's happening in nursing homes a lot. And, you know, the fact that we know at least 40% of the cases, 40% of the deaths to COVID have come out of nursing homes. But nobody's talking about the fact that like the first like group of folks that Trump started talking to after the election about deregulation was the nursing home lobby, and how powerful that lobby is. They have a vested interest in keeping the doors open and the disabled and old people coming in. And the work that we're going to actually have to do to unpack this is going to be huge. And while we can sit there and say, yeah, but the average baby boomer isn't going to want to look at Shady Pines as the option right now. For disabled people, for poor folks, for folks from communities of color, like there is no alternative. It's actually like the federal government has incentivized the institutionalization of our people. And it's always been that way. And it's always going to be that way until we actually start unpacking some of this.
Yeah, and I think that right now the conversations and I think understanding of abolition, especially that's incarceration and its institutionalization, it's one of the same. You know, the ideas that people do not belong in congregate settings, and that includes prisons, long-term care facilities, psychiatric hospitals, detention centers, homeless shelters, right? This is all interconnected, and it's part of this really long history of hiding people away, like segregating us, you know, separating us. I think if thinking about the upcoming 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, you know, I'm just really one of those who tends to be more on the salty side of things and focus more rather than rah-rahing. You know, thinking about the long work ahead, because people still do not have really the right to live in the community. If we think about all the structural pieces in place that are really kept to keep us hidden, and when you're hidden and not seen, whether that's in San Quentin prison in California, where there are just massive amounts of people incarcerated who are, you know, exposed and infected with COVID. You know, this is just, you know, this idea that when you're hidden, segregated, you're thought of as invisible and disposable. And I think this is really truly a reflection of how society sees us and values us. So, you know, part of the work is not just political, but it's really about cultural change. And all of this really hopefully feeds into this overarching goal toward justice, as Jen mentioned. I know we're going to do Q&A in the last 15 minutes, but I want to open up to Rebecca and Jen and say, do you have any questions for me about the anthology or any thoughts now that you both have a copy? And Beth will jump back in about 5 minutes to moderate Q&A. So I'm going to just open it up to Jen and Becca for any final thoughts or deep burning questions you have for me.
Ooh, well, I have a question for you, Alice. It's kind of related to this event and the book and everything. You talked a lot when opening up this event about the need for virtual events and how that is a disability access issue. And I wholeheartedly agree for you. But I've been thinking a lot as a community organizer, how do I do virtual events in Native community when we have such a huge digital divide? You know, that's really for both rural and urban natives. You know, in rural lands, not all our lands have high-speed broadband or have wireless telecommunications. And then you also have to think about, even in urban areas, because so many of us live in poverty, you know, we can't afford phones and computers and those things, and we can't afford internet at home. And here we are in the middle of a pandemic, so the normal free spaces that people would use to get online, they can't use. So I know, kind of like a long question that could go off into a giant tangent in conversation, but I'd love to hear any thoughts and ideas you have about how to make our events and our media and things more accessible when there is a digital divide. Like, is this
Yeah.
something you've been thinking about, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't want to like make it sound like I think online events are like, you know, the most fantastic thing, because I think it's all about having as many different approaches and options. I think access is all about having as many widening the ways that we connect. And, you know, online is one of them, but also I think, you know, we should really look to the people who are in rural areas who don't, or in urban areas who don't have the access, who are really at the forefront of being innovative and creative. You know, I think there are still people who use, you know, phone conferences and also just different, like even mailings. So like by mail, I think is still another really interesting way that people are, you know, publishing newsletters of different ways to have people engage. You know, I think it's kind of cool to see people sometimes going back to like old school ways of connecting. I think that's super exciting and really innovative. I think, as all three of us know, like, you know, disabled people are incredibly creative and adaptive. Like, you know, we make do with a lot of things. And I wish that more people understood like our creative power to innovate. So I really do look to people who are in the communities right now dealing with the lack of broadband to really, you know, they're the most of the solutions. But I do think things like phone conferences, which can have its own kind of drawbacks, but that is another option. And also, I think, you know, Dr. Wood, like, you know, let's save the US Postal Service. That mail is also still a way that people get information and find one another. So those are only two things that come to mind. But I think, you know, there are a lot of other people who probably have much better solutions and who are already doing those things. So, but those are just two kind of things that come to my mind. And I don't want to be some sort of evangelist on online events. I'm not trying to do that, but I'm just trying to say, like, after the, you know, pandemic, let's keep up as many different ways that we want to have options. And I think I really do hope to see online events just become part of this, you know, broader array of ways for people to get together. How about you, Becca? Do you have any final kind of comments or thoughts?
Well, my question for you, Alice, is I was thinking about how we met. And I think, and most folks don't realize, I met Alice Wong because she submitted a video to the White House for Asian American Heritage Month. And my dear friend and colleague, Gautam Raghavan, was in charge of reviewing these videos, and he got like thousands of videos. And what he did at the time was he basically did a divide and conquer. He walked around the building, talked to all his friends, and said, hey, do you have like 20 minutes? Do you have time to watch like 50 videos? Hey, how about you? Can you do like 100 videos? And Alice's video was one of the 250 videos that I volunteered to watch for Gautam. And it was an amazing video. And it talked about how the stigma of using PAS in diverse households, personal assistance services. And it led to actually me calling you. Like, it was totally an American president moment. I picked up the phone, I called, I was like, hi, I'm Rebecca Coakley calling from the White House. Is Alice Wong available? Do you have any desire to serve in a presidential administration? And I remember you saying, I can't fly, I can't travel. And I remember being like, I don't care, we'll find a way to figure it out. And I think so when I think about that conversation, I always think about like the value of service and the value that anyone can be great because anyone can serve. obviously, going back to the MLK quote. But I do think that for a lot of people with disabilities, especially folks that are feeling isolated, folks in more rural areas, folks that don't have connections to a broader community, there really is a feeling like that they can't contribute. Like we know the stigma around online activism, and I know you're talking about it tomorrow for Crip Camp. What would you say to, a 15-year-old Alice Wong out in like Poughkeepsie or outside of like Omaha who's watching this and saying, yeah, but y'all are these like badass movers and shakers and whatever. I can't be like that, or that's not a possibility for me.
Well, I would say, I think a lot about my own childhood. A friend of mine, DM'd me the other day, saying like, can you imagine, like, we're living like our wildest dreams, and I feel like, yeah, this is really true. I'm living, but I mean, I think to get really real, like when I was a disabled kid, I couldn't imagine my future, and I think a lot of young people who are disabled today still feel that way, even in 2020. And I think, in the description to the book, it's, this was really important to me that, first of all, you are seen, you are valued, I love you. And what you do, whatever you do in the future, is going to be enough. Like, I don't want anybody to follow in my footsteps because you're going to make your own path. Like, I don't want anybody to kind of look up to me because I'm not perfect. I'm just a person just splashing around, making some trouble, having fun, taking joy in things right now, just like this, being together with you all. And, I really do encourage people to just figure out who they are and, find what moves them, find what's, makes them feel alive, and then just trust yourself and let that guide you. And I think that's, what it's all about, to having this freedom to just be yourself and know that it is more than enough and the world needs you. So to all the young folks out there, we need you. I'm so happy to be like, I cannot wait for the day to just step away and just, the next generations. I'm ready for y'all. So I think with that, I think Beth's gonna ask some Q&A now.
Yeah, absolutely. I almost don't want to follow that. That was really amazing and beautiful, but we have some awesome questions too. And I'm going to pick kind of throughout the list so we can get to as many as we can. This first one I really love. It's to all three of you. How did you first come to connect with the wider disability community? I know in the green room, we were talking, Rebecca, about somebody who is newly diagnosed with an autoimmune disability, wanting to connect with the greater community. And so how did that happen for each of you?
Yeah, do you want to go first? And then want to go and then Becca?
Yeah, sure, I can go first. Well, I got to say, I struggled with my own internalized ableism for a very long time. I've had health problems since I was a kid. I struggle a lot with chronic pain, and the chronic pain really started when I was about 13 years old. But unfortunately, those things got worse with age, and there's a whole host of reasons for that. But it took a long time for me to finally be able to say, I'm disabled. It took a long time for me to get to that point. I also, before I came into journalism, I worked in politics. And that was an area where I felt like if I spoke at all about being disabled or being chronically ill, I would never get a job. At one point I was really considering running for office. And I was like, if I come out as being disabled, I'll never get into office. I'm like, I'm already an openly bisexual, like Native woman from, more sort of rural working class background. I was like, it's not exactly easy for someone like me to work in this field and get into politics. So I felt like I had to hide who I was for a very long time. It really did take my health issues reaching the point where I just couldn't ignore my disabilities anymore. I had to talk about them. And I think it's because it's something I always kind of felt like I had to keep quiet, kind of like being queer and such, or like, you can be Native, but don't be that Indian, that causes trouble. So I think all those messages just growing up, by the time I hit my 30s, I was like, to hell with this. And so I just started coming out real loud and bold. And I started seeking out more community. I personally felt like I needed to have more disabled and chronically ill people in my life. I needed to have people who understood those things. And I also felt like I had a responsibility to use the social capital that I have to fight for all of my communities. And that includes the disability community. So long story short, I think it was a journey for myself to start to love and embrace and accept who I am. And then also just, through social media and in my own organizing work and writing and things, I've been able to connect with people like Alice and Rebecca and a lot of other really amazing, fierce disability justice warriors that are out there. I don't want to say that we don't have things to work on within the disability community, but I do feel a sense of acceptance within disability community that I don't always feel in some of my other communities. Mm-hmm. So yeah, just reach out to us, really. Like, my direct messages are open, my email's out there. If you want to talk to me, reach out to me and I'll do my best to talk with you and be a support. Yeah, so I'll stop now since I'm starting to ramble.
So yeah, I think similar to Jen, I didn't really kind of feel, I knew I was disabled like my entire life, but I didn't think about it as a politicized identity until my like teenage years or like when I started college. And I think, this is in the 90s. And I think that was a time when there were like different kind of publications by disabled people. And that's when I really learned, like, oh my gosh, like there's, all these kind of independent, publications written by disabled people about activism that just kind of blew my mind. And also, I would have to say reading work by other disabled people. That really was my first entry into, wow, like I am not alone in this. I would have to say that when I was an undergrad, I learned about disability studies and learning about disabled scholars such as Barbara Faye Waxman, who I think was personally somebody that I wanted to be when I grew up. When I talked to the late Paul Longmore, who was he was instrumental in encouraging me to move from Indiana to the San Francisco Bay Area. And, at that time, I was so like, I felt like this suburban mouse. Like, can I do this? Like, do you think it'll be like, and he's like, yeah. He's like, come on over. You're going to be great. Mm-hmm. And I never felt that kind of like, had a disabled elder who was like so encouraging. He didn't even know me. A professor knew him, gave me his phone number. I called him out of the blue because he's just one of the few disabled professors that I knew about. She's like, just give him a call, give it a try. He just welcomed me automatically. which really, as a young person, it just based an impression on me because of the generosity and the genuine love and the will to make sense. So there's really through reading different stories and work by disabled people, and also just these individual conversations with people that, ended up really being like my mentors, people who've been there, done that way before I did, saying, yeah, you could do this too if you want. Like, you could do a lot of things, and we're here waiting for you. So, Beck and I both talked about now we're the elders in a lot of ways. And I just believe in, we gotta pay it forward and we gotta give back. And, we, even though there's so many, the 88 generation is amazing, and young people are already just doing some disabled youth are incredibly organized and just, so unapologetic. But I also think there's still a lot of us, whether, you're young or you become disabled recently, who still need to kind of, figure things out and find their way. And it's really up to us to welcome everyone in, because it's not easy. People are so scared about using the wrong terms, or, oh, am I disabled enough? I hate that question, because I hate the idea that people feel like they're not disabled enough to be part of the community. And I think that's one of the biggest kind of things that we who do identify as disabled have a, an obligation to say, yes, you are welcome. Anybody's welcome. So,
I think for me, I had it really different. Like 80% of people with disabilities grow up in families without people like them. Like I didn't. Like I actually went up and got a picture. Like here's mom and dad. In the 70s, when my dad drove his 69 Camaro from Selma, Alabama to San Francisco, because he fell in love with a flower child at a Little People convention. And so I grew up seeing my dwarfism always reflected back to me. Like I remember it wasn't until my mom passed away that I had a moment where I realized I never thought my body was funky. Like I never thought my body was strange. There was never anything I wanted to change about my body. Unlike a lot of my other friends with dwarfism that grew up in like predominantly average households. That's what I like to call them. Like non-little people, y'all are the averages, because like I just think like y'all are average. It's all right. You're not little. We can't all be little. It's okay, really. And so like growing up in a non-average world, like for me, I always thought that like it was normal. I thought like, everybody should have little waists and big butts. Like I felt a total winner as a parent when my daughter was in preschool when she was 3, and they did like a bar chart in the classroom talking about what's your favorite part of your body, and they had to create their own category for Keah, because Keah was like, it's my butt. And they were like, oh, and she's like, what? I have a great butt. Like I'm a little person. We have butts. And I went to pick her up from school, and I remember her teachers like being like, so we're not really comfortable, but like she wants us to write butt. And I was like, why? She's got a great butt. She's a little person. We're proud of that sort of thing where I'm from. And so I think for me, like I almost grew up with like in really a different reality, and I think among little people, like as a community, we're just sort of an anomaly in a lot of disability spaces in general. Our relationship with media tends to be different. It's just as toxic, but it's different. I mean, we have families that we have like multi-generational dwarf families that actively celebrate their family's role in the Wizard of Oz, which in a lot of ways is one of the first public disability events ever. It actually fundamentally changed the United States Census for Los Angeles because of the giant mass of little people that when they showed up in LA to film the movie, they fell in love. They met people like them. they didn't go home to Indiana or New York or Ohio or wherever they had come from, because they first finally saw themselves reflected in the spaces that they were in. And so for me, it was always sort of that thing. But like when I think about the community, the quote I always go to is, I'm a Gen Xer. I read Rolling Stone nonstop growing up back when it actually was decent. Is the Lester Bangs quote about the only true currency in this bankrupt world is what you share with someone when you're uncool. And I think it's one of those things, like the conversations that disabled people have among other disabled people. Like, I remember talking to a colleague of mine who has really bad migraines. And I was like, yeah, my migraines are horrible. Like my migraines are my worst disability. And she looked at me and she said, you mean your migraines are worse than being like, are harder to deal with than being a little person? I was like, yeah, like being a little person's nothing, like for me, but a migraine will keep me in bed for like 3 or 4 days. A migraine means I can't play with my kids. A migraine means I can't get my butt together to write the dang book I've been supposed to write for the last 3 years. And so I think it's having those conversations, those peer-to-peer connections, those one-on-one conversations. It's actually why in the work that I do, when I talk about how we define disability, that I talk about eating disorders as one of the largest disabilities in this country that we don't talk about in our community. I specifically say, if you're a woman or a person of color and you've been watching a pharmaceutical ad at home in the middle of the day, and you think you have what that ad says you have, and you go in and ask your doctor and they tell you it's all in your head, you're likely part of the community. We've done such a bad job of building. We talk about accessibility, but we don't talk about the size of disability, the size of the tent that includes all of our people. And it really comes down to that conversation, Alice, that you said, and Jen, that you said around like being disabled enough. And, to me, I always go to like, does it impact the activities of your daily life? Does it impact what you eat? Does it impact what you wear? Does it impact, how you get along with your loved ones? And that to me is the power of the definition of disability in the ADA. It was never a checklist, but yet we've internalized the idea, both in ourselves and in society, that there is this checklist. And instead it's like, does it impact your life? If it is, then welcome. Like, we've been waiting for you. And as a Yelder, Alice, I've learned this term Yelder from our mutual friend, Alex Tom, in the Bay Area. We are young elders. Yay, Alex just said, hi, Alex. That makes my day. That we really have the foresight, both sort of like looking forward and looking back, to think through, like, how can we be the Yelder that we knew we needed when we were growing up?
Yeah, that's informed me in terms of like, being the person that I wish I had. And I think that's, just, we're all trying to just figuring things out. I think that's, what it means to be disabled in a non-disabled world. It's just, we're constantly creating and co-creating, which is really damn beautiful. It is,
Thank you all so much. I have a question for you three. We are at 7:05, but there are so many good questions. Are you three able to stick around for 10 more minutes?
Yeah, that's
I can, yes.
Definitely.
Thank you so much. So this next question is from Sabrina Epstein. It's a really gorgeous question. They ask, we rightfully talk a lot about the many problems facing the disability community, but I also want to know what your access dreams are. What does the beautifully accessible, interdependent world of your dreams look like?
That's a great question. Thank you, Sabrina, for submitting it. And it's literally, I have an immediate answer because I wrote about it, I think 5 weeks ago. Did an essay on my website, and it was in response. There was really an opinion piece that I tried to get published as an op-ed that I tried 4 different publications. They were all turned down, and it was about COVID-19, disability rights, and congregate settings. And the very last piece of the essay my dream for the future is that nobody lives in a congregate setting, that everybody is going to live in the community, out in the open with robust supports, like whatever people need in terms of just whatever they need to live, to thrive, to do what they want to do. I mean, that, that's the future. Like, I mean, and I think that's something that we should have now, but I think it's something that we absolutely have to work toward, this idea of ending not just institutions, but all kinds of forms of incarceration. And I think people today still, I still get replies on Twitter like, but what about safety? What about my grandma who has multiple needs and she just, she can't make decisions? And, I'm like, you lack so much imagination and you lack political will. Like, this is, if we don't dream this up, it's never going to happen. And there are visionaries already right now doing the work. And I feel like this is the future that I want, where absolutely everyone gets what they need in order to live the lives they want. And we're not close to that yet, but like, we can keep on saying that this is what we expect and not to expect anything less. So happy 8830, y'all. Let's aim higher.
Rebecca, maybe?
I always think of my first job in DC. I worked at this little over 50-year-old education policy nonprofit. It's actually where I met my husband and where I met one of my best friends. And I remember we were getting new computers, and I was managing at the time a network of young disabled leaders from around the country across disability networks. So we had young people that were blind, young people that were deaf, folks that used augmentative communication devices, people with mental health disabilities, just a beautifully glorious mix of folks. And I remember going to download AOL Instant Messenger, like back in the day. We're going to go back in the day, like back post dial-up, but like pre-Facebook, I guess. And I went to download AOL-IM and it kicked it back and said that it violated security protocols and I needed to go talk to my administrator. So I walked down the hall to our head of HR, who was also our COO, and I was like, hey, I was trying to download AOL Instant Messenger and it wouldn't let me download it. And there was a significant generational divide in this organization, you could say. And she looked at me and she said, well, why would you need that? And I said, well, I manage an organization of young people, or I manage a project that centers young people, and our board of directors are all young people with disabilities. So you just want to sit on the internet and chat with your friends all day. And I remember pausing and saying, how else would you suggest a deaf person talk to a blind person without having to go through a non-disabled person? And there was like this awkward pause. And I don't think she liked my tone. And actually, I know she didn't like my tone because she took it up with my boss later. But she was like, well, I don't know. And I was like, well, as per the term of the grant, like we have to be in ongoing communication for this work that we're doing. Like you have to let me have this like IMing software so I can do my job. And she was irate about it. And she went to my boss about it. And my boss was an individual who was blind, who used IM all the time to talk to his deaf friends and his friends with other disabilities from around the country. And so I think she thought she was going to win and she didn't. And for me, and it's one of those things that I still talk to people today, especially the young people that are prohibited from having the means to build community, that are prohibited from having the means to engage with folks. I know LGBT young people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who their parents and their schools write it in their IEPs that if they behave if they adopt a gender identity that's different than their biological sex it's a defiance behavior. And like, I dream of a world where that's not the case. I dream of a world where folks can communicate freely, where folks can be who they want to be, and have that respected, and that the diversity of the disability community is actually valued, not just by our community, but by the majority culture.
Sorry, Jen.
So definitely echoing Alice and Rebecca, some other thoughts that came to my mind about what I would like to see is I want to live in a world where we can actually work on our own healing, our own self-care, where we're not constantly running around trying to put out fires, where we're not having to fight pipelines or mining projects and man camps which come into our lands and pollute them and cause, you know, rape and domestic violence and things. Like, those things create health issues, they create disabilities. You know, I don't want to live in a world where we have to do that. I'm tired of living in a world where, you know, we're struggling to find the means for trans youth to find a place to live because their parents kicked them out of their house. You know, like, how do we ever reach this point where we get to start working on our own individual trauma as well as the historical and intergenerational trauma that a lot of our communities suffer from, if we're always having to run around trying to like fight to keep a roof over our head or have food or, you know, a basic income or such, you know? So I think for me, like, there's something that we say a lot within Indian country is that we are our ancestors' wildest dreams come true. And I love that. And I try to think about that, not just as a Native, but as a queer person and a disabled person, that like, I'm living a life that my ancestors wanted to some extent. You know, I never thought I would live past 30. I genuinely never imagined a life past 30. You know, I've struggled a lot with trauma and how that's impacted me. And I did try to kill myself a lot as a child, and some as an adult. And so I just never imagined becoming a Yelder, as I think it was Rebecca who said. But it's really awesome. I'm really happy that I'm like a Gen Xer and I'm still alive and still here and like fighting back and making the establishment angry. But it'd just be nice to have that world where we can all work on our collective healing and our individual healing. Yeah, I would love to see that.
Thank you, all three, for those answers. I think we are going to have to end on this last question. And I'm so sorry to all the questions in the Q&A, but I do encourage you to reach out to our panelists tonight to ask them, because they're really great. But so I'm wondering what you are all reading in this moment of global pandemic. What are you turning to?
Well, I'm gonna shout out a book that's fun. You know, we need to like have fun. I mean, yeah, times are bleak, and you know, I think it's all about finding joy. So I'm reading a great YA graphic novel by Marika Steinkamp, Marieke Marika is a disabled writer and editor, and this is called The Oracle Code. And again, this is about a canonical DC Comics character, the Oracle, who is also known as Barbara Gordon. And in this YA graphic novel, not only is it centered on a young Barbara Gordon, there are multiple disabled characters that it's all about gender community. So, you know, these sort of things are just things that I just love diving into. So I can't recommend this more highly in terms of just, you know, finding joy.
Do you want me to jump? I'll jump in.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
I've been reading the Oracle Code too, and oh my God, it made my day. Like, I absolutely loved it. It's such a badass book, and I really suggest everybody pick it up. I'm going to shout out my Keah Brown's book, The Pretty One. I absolutely love this. I've read this now probably 3 or 4 times. My husband's read it, like most of my team at work has read it. I think it's just such a powerful message, such a powerful collection of essays. You know, I think the thing that excites me the most about it is, you know, I'm raising a brilliant, amazing, badass, fashionable, iconic 6-year-old Black disabled girl. And before this book, I didn't really think that there were a lot of books that she was going to be able to pull off the shelf growing up. And when Keah started writing it, one of the things that really excited me about it was the fact that, like, this is going to be a book on our Coakleyverse shelves for quite a long time. And I can't wait for, as Keah gets older, being able to reach up climb the bookshelves, which she already does, which is terrifying, and pull a book down from her auntie Keah, because mommy doesn't have all the answers.
So I had a hard time deciding which book to give because I'm usually juggling several books at once. Some are fun, some are work, some are boring, like How to Be a Better Writer kind of books. But I'm going to do 2 quick ones. So the one that I am reading right now, kind of more so often, is called Lebanon, A House Divided. It's a little older book, but I feel like, sadly, like the average American, I don't know a great deal about the Middle East. And I feel, as somebody who's been called a terrorist a lot in the last few years, I'm feeling a certain affinity with like my Middle Eastern and Muslim friends, and was like, let me make a concerted effort to start making, you know, to start educating myself about this part of the world, as well as how Indigenous people in that part of the world are faring and being treated. But I also want to give a quick shout out to There by Tommy Orange. I very rarely read fiction. I'm mostly just nonfiction, but this book is amazing. And I think Politics and Prose sells it. But Tommy Orange is native, grew up in the Bay Area. In this book, it's all about sort of the urban native experience in the Bay. And it's just, it's powerful. And as a mixed race native, there was a lot in it that I could really relate to, and that it's such an amazing book. Like, I can't talk it up enough.
Thank you all. I'm putting the links to these books in our chat so that everybody who's still with us can check them out on PNP's website. Thank you all. Alice, Rebecca, Jen, this has been such an excellent night. I'm so happy that so many people spent their Saturday with you all to celebrate this beautiful book. I'll remind everybody that the book is available from PNP. The link is in the chat. Get it. It is an excellent collection. And your purchase doesn't only amplify the voices of these disabled writers, but it helps your local independent bookstore, Politics and Prose, stay open and keep bringing you this content. So thank you so much, and thank you to our interpreters and captioners tonight for making this event accessible to our patrons. I hope that you all stay well and stay well read. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Bye.